This was my fourth experience with 4-ACO DALT, and my second time taking it orally. Unfortunately, it will also be my last experience with this particular supply, as my old source seems to have shorted me somewhat. I was supposed to have about 150 milligrams left and had planned to take 100 milligrams orally today and use the rest perhaps through insufflation or vaporization, but alas I was left to instead just take orally everything that remained, which came out to about 80 milligrams. A little disappointing as I had hoped to compare it to 100 milligrams of 4-HO-DPT, but in the end I'm sort of glad I didn't take that much anyway. This was already a very satisfying day. There was a specific reason that I was so interested in the idea of taking this particular tryptamine for my next psychedelic experience. Just last month there was released a scientific study done on members of the family of N-diallyltryptamines, DALT, 5-FDALT, 5-CL-DALT, 5-BR-DALT, 5-ME-DALT, and 5-MAU-DALT, to be precise, that found all of them to have relevant binding affinity for the kappa opioid receptor, the same receptor through which salvinorin A of Salvia divinorum exerts its hallucinogenic effects as an agonist. The study did not determine whether these chemicals bind as agonists or antagonists, but the binding data alone was enough to get me very intrigued. On my most recent experience with 60 milligrams of 4-ACO DALT taken orally, I had honestly felt that my movement tendencies were being altered in exactly the same way that I had experienced only ever on salvia before, and I thought that I could sense a similar style of dissociation accompanying it as well, but I brushed it off at the time as just my mind trying to understand the state I was in because I had no reason to think that there could be a connection between the two states. But then I read this study. In retrospect, it had me thinking, were there even more similarities than that? The study had not covered 4-HO-DALT or 4-ACO DALT, but it sure seems likely from what it did cover that this activity could apply to them as well. I truthfully had also felt a similar anxious dissociation to salvia both times I had tried smoking 4-ACO DALT in a bowl of cannabis, and I felt I could think of physiological comparisons between 4-ACO DALT and salvia from all of my past trips on it as well, but at this point I knew that trying to apply these thoughts in retrospect was only going to cloud my judgment, and so I opted to update my knowledge of the 4-ACO DALT from a fresh perspective instead. My previous experience with psychedelics includes psilocybe cubensis, ipecacuanha tricolor, argyria nervosa, bufotenin, DMT, LSD, 2CB, 2CI, DOC, MDMA, 4-ACO DMT, 4-HO-MET, 4-ACO MET, 4-HO-DET, 4-ACO DET, 4-HO-MPT, 4-HO-DPT, 4-HO-MEPT, 4-HO-DPT, 4-ACO DALT, MEPT, DPT, DALT, and at least a couple of unidentified things. My most recent trip had been almost exactly 1 month before this, on 50 milligrams of 4-HO-MEPT. T1:00. At around this time I was preparing the dose and discovered that I had less remaining than I thought. A little disheartened, but still optimistic about the day, I packed the 80 milligrams into a gel capsule. T+0:00 to 80 milligrams of 4-ACO DALT taken orally in a capsule. Immediately afterward I started loading a bong full of cannabis to be smoked a little further down the road, and then I did the same for a balloon of nitrous oxide containing 8 cartridges. When I finished doing these things, I sat down and took a few minutes to make sure that my intentions for the experience were positively focused and that my mind was open to whatever the state had to show me. T+0:20, as this was still early in the day and I was feeling a little grimy, I decided to take a nice hot shower while waiting for the effects to kick in. My past experience with 4-ACO DALT led me to believe that this one would be very slow to show itself, so I wasn't really worried about looking for effects at this time. However, there was 1 or 2 times where I noticed that something in my imagination was very significantly enhanced in an artistic or hedonistic way similar to what would be happening on the onset of other strong tryptamine trips for me, so I grew more confident that something worthwhile would make itself known eventually at least. T+0:40, I got out of the shower and started cleaning myself off and grooming myself, which felt mostly normal but still nice. I would say that this was the first point that I truly felt sure that something was going on, as I did have a very slight and ignorable but still undeniable increase in energy. The clean physical boost despite a lack of any manic headspace changes having developed thus far felt very similar to the onset of 4-HO-DPT. Most notably, and now quite easy to notice as I was searching for it, I also found myself twirling to the left as I walked, which again is one of the unique physical quirks I have often gotten after smoking salvia. Was I finding it now because it was actually part of the effects, or just because I had come to expect it to be there? Of course it is impossible to say, but since I did notice it also before any of this, I would say that there seems likely to be at least some merit to it, and it was at the very least enough to get me excited at this point. T+0:50, feeling a little more assured that something interesting was going to come out of the stoves, I went to lie down in bed and meditate for a few minutes while also starting to smoke that bowl of cannabis for the first time. When I did so, I felt like I could sort of tell that there was something being enhanced by it. But it still felt very weak at this point. So, once I let the feeling build up a little bit, I decided to stack that balloon of nitrous oxide on top of it. The experience was mostly what I would expect from a typical out-of-body dose of nitrous oxide on its own, but there was an added feeling of general intensity to it all and a few interesting visuals of arms reaching out to me, which notably is common for me on both psychedelics and salvia. T+1:10, the nitrous made me feel a little bit better overall, but it didn't seem to do much to boost the trip quite yet. It seems that we'll have to wait until later. I decided to start listening to music at this point instead, as one of the things that I recall standing out in my previous experiences with 4-ACO DALT was that there actually was a surprising amount of music enhancement that accompanied it despite how mild most of its other effects were in comparison. This turned out to be the case again for this trip, though I should note that it became clear to me this time around that the enhancement that 4-ACO DALT is not one of deep, piercing complexity in the sense of what I've gotten from MDMA, LSD, or MEPT, but is instead more just like a general feeling of greater pleasantness to the experience. It is actually calming, in a way. T+1:20, at this point, I again am seemingly able to confirm some suspicions that I have retroactively applied to my past experiences. I once again am not only sweating a lot more than do I on most tryptamines, but I also have a somewhat mild but very obvious pins and needles feeling which seems to be traveling around my skin. Both of these sensations, as more knowledgeable psychonauts may have been able to predict, are also very common for me during salvia experiences. T+1:30, the aforementioned physical sensations are intellectually interesting but at this point not entirely pleasant, and so to distract myself from them temporarily I do a smaller balloon with 4 cartridges of nitrous oxide in it while listening to music. Afterwards I am feeling a little bit better again, but still not quite there yet. I am still in the psychedelic come-up space where I feel good, but weird good, and this is particularly notable with my mind now paying extra close attention to the similarities between this experience and my past ones with salvia. It almost felt like my brain was now working overtime to identify the individual serotonergic type and salvia type effects I was experiencing just because I couldn't help but notice the comparisons, and this was causing some sort of issue with how the trip normally would have been able to unfold with each part seamlessly entwined with the other uninhibited. It was a little hectic, but still quite calm at the same time, and I kept faith that it would resolve itself as trips do. Thinking I should try for a change of scenery, I decided to step into the backyard for a few minutes. T+1:40, the outside weather feels really great, but it's way too bright for me out there. In retrospect, while writing this, I feel that it was somewhat similar to the music, in the sense that it felt more intense than normal sunlight despite the fact that my visual sense was not incredibly deeper than normal. Still, it was enough to send me back inside, but not after enjoying a couple more hits of cannabis while I was out there. As these hits were kicking, something I was now finding obvious was that I was indeed entering a full-fledged psychedelic state, even if it was still an overall mild one, and that this trip was going to surpass any of my previous experiences with 4-ACO DALT. Happy to see it developing, I decided to try and get myself lost in some more music. T+1:45, listening to music turned out to be the best idea I could have possibly come up with. Despite how altered I definitely felt leading up to that point, there had been times where I almost wondered if I was just fooling myself into thinking that because, again like 4-HO-DPT, but possibly even more so, there was an incredible lack of typical psychedelic thought patterns. However, after the song came on there was no more doubt in my mind. I was struck with the urge to dance, and upon doing so I found that my dancing was directed and trance-inducing not only as much as it ever has been in the depths of my powerful psychedelic experiences in the past, but in fact to an even greater degree than I had ever experienced before. At the time, it felt extremely obvious to me as well that this was at least partially because I was not only harnessing the psychedelic energy which I have grown so attached to in such scenarios, but also the salvia-like twirling effect which I had noted before, and which I have used to incite intoxicating dance sessions even after smoking salvia in the past. Really, as someone who deeply loves dancing as a way of feeling free on psychedelics, I cannot express how intense this experience felt to me. I felt unleashed on a level that I have not in a very long time, and proud of myself on new levels as well. After making a note of this in my phone, I also looked back over my past few timestamps and realized just how intense the time dilation had gotten, without me even noticing. Each of them had seemed very far apart when I was actually writing them down. T+1:50. At this point I'm starting to look around and seeing that window blinds are beginning to shimmer and warp in rainbow colors, and upon looking at the ceiling I see transparent but very active and colorful patterns slithering about as well. None of this is really even noticeable if I don't look for it, but it's definitely apparent when I do. I am starting to get a little lost in thought, possibly because on top of this trip I also feel very high from the cannabis I've been smoking, and the time dilation seems to get even more intense. Thoughts that seem to last forever in reality take less than a minute to complete. At this point I am still feeling sweaty and the like as well, still have some of that weird goodness going on, but I would say that it is more wholly positive now, just a little quirky. I have started to really enjoy myself and the state that I'm in. T+2:00. I do another balloon of 4 nitrous oxide cartridges while listening to more music, and it feels good but nothing particularly interesting stands out about it in my memory. Shortly afterward I also ate some strawberry yogurt, thinking that I should probably get at least a little bit more food in my stomach. T+2:20. The trip seems to have shifted gears a little bit from the more energetic phase, probably again helped along by smoking cannabis, and so I decided to shift my environment as well. I finally finished up the last of that first bong bowl I had loaded, packed another one, and started running a nice hot bath for myself. One of the most notable feelings I had at this time was that there was a sort of odd sedative edge to this trip despite the stimulating psychedelic part of it as well, and as I had suspicions that this could be due to the kappa opioid receptor activity, I was really wondering if the bath was just as wonderful as it can be on regular opioids as well. T+3:40. The bath turned out to be a fantastic idea, and though I can't speak to whether or not it was due to opioid effects playing role, I can say that it was phenomenally relaxing and euphoric. I spent the majority of my time in there just listening to more music and running my hands all over my body and breathing deeply. There is definitely a tactile, intimate edge to this one, at least for me. By the time I got out of the water some of the body feelings I had felt before seemed to wearing off, and now it was getting down to just being sort of a pleasant buzzing sensation. T+4:15. I'm mostly just wandering around and thinking at this point, beyond the main part of the experience but still feeling good, and I started thinking about getting myself some food. Lights weren't too bright as to be distracting anymore, but I was unsure of whether I really wanted to drive myself anywhere or not. After about 15 minutes or so of debate I felt myself rising up for another wave just a little bit as edges seemed to take on slight colorful wears again, so I ultimately decided against it. T+4:40. I started eating a Lunchables meal instead, and at this time I also started texting a few friends of mine about the experience and my feelings about it. I also continued listening to music, though more just having it on at the background by now. T+5:15. At this point I finished smoking the second bowl of cannabis I had loaded, and I finished texting my friends for the time being. T+5:40. I decided to do one more balloon of nitrous oxide, using 8 cartridges, while watching BoJack Horseman. Doing nitrous while watching TV usually sends me into a strangely almost alcohol-like dissociative intoxication of extreme euphoria, and this was no different. I came out of the state laughing openly as I often do, and I was happy to end my use of the nitrous there. T+6:15. By this time I no longer felt that there was anything but a lingering body high, and now some physical fatigue like head tension of leg pain from how intensely I was dancing before, and I was getting hungrier for a full meal again. So I drove to get myself some fast food. I got chicken tenders which were okay, not great, but definitely filling for the moment. I began eating them starting at around T+6:40. T+7:05. After I finished eating, I loaded my third bowl of cannabis and began typing this trip report. It is now roughly T+8:15 and I mostly feel sweaty and have a bit of a headache, but I'm still feeling positive overall due to having had a really nice day on this stuff. So, in the end I would say that looking at 4-ACO DALT from the perspective that it could have salvia-like pharmacological properties did seem to yield some interesting insights, which seemed at least real enough to me at the time. Whether or not they are truly valid again I can obviously not say, but I do think that it was a very interesting and worthwhile experience overall to have this trip specifically while searching for those qualities in it. It definitely only continues to open my mind to all of the incredible possibilities that these substances provide access to. However, in addition to the noted salvia-like effects, there was also a new perspective I gained from this trip which I did not at all expect going in and purposefully withheld until the very end of this report. Quite honestly, I actually felt that 4-ACO-DALT could very possibly work as a surprisingly nice MDMA replacement for me. This is a loaded statement, as I must say that I no longer seem capable of enjoying MDMA itself. I do not miss it as I feel that my time with it has long since passed, but some of my putting it behind me was definitely brought on by the fact that my irresponsible use of it seemed to be causing my body to develop all kinds of negative responses to it more and more each time I used it. Eventually, I reached a point where it just became enjoyable for like the first maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and beyond that it was a constant struggle to fight off the creeping feelings of anxiety, feelings of overheating, fluctuating heart rate, strong head pressure, and so on. When I actually enjoyed MDMA though, the effects that I looked for it most specifically were a psychedelic body high and positive emotional push without the altered headspace, colorful but mild background psychedelic visuals with hints of delirium mixed in, altered time perception, a combination of mental stimulation and physical relaxation and analgesia, significant music enhancement, and the ability to dance really wildly, and this 4-ACO-DALT gave me all of those effects exactly. It was not as penetrating as MDMA has always been for me, instead being much more of a creeper and something that works its way in subtly, but ultimately I find each of the effects to be just as significant, and to be perfectly frank throughout this trip I found myself comparing the experience to MDMA at least as much as I was comparing it to salvia, if not more so. Particularly in relation to the dancing, which stood out to me because of how incredibly deep it was reflective of powerful psychedelia despite how mild and surface level most of this trip seemed to be, and which took me much further out than even MDMA ever has. Who could have seen that coming? One more note that I would like to make about this experience, which I have not touched upon yet, is that I am starting to get the feeling that putting tryptamines into gel capsules to take them has a much more significant impact on the experience overall than I would have expected. I have now taken 4-HO-DPT, DPT, and 4-ACO-DALT in capsules. In every single one of those trips was less hallucinogenic than my trips on lower doses of the same three substances eaten straight without capsules. So, either my tolerance just happened to hit some kind of wall that it can't pass right when I switched over to capsules, or it's having some kind of effect on the trip. Given that these chemicals are said to be, and in the case of 4-ACO-DALT I know it's true, much deeper when taken by inhalation or insufflation, it wouldn't surprise me then if the reason that the capsules trips are weaker still is just because they are slowing the absorption even more rather than speeding it up. It makes enough sense to think about, but is a little disheartening as I greatly prefer the capsules to eating them straight. But, such is life. So that's about all I've got for now. I am sad that I do not have any more 4-ACO-DALT to work with, but I do feel that my time with it was well spent.